As you already know, in the death camps, not only the mechanism of extermination operated, but also terrible medical experiments were carried out on a regular basis. Many of you will be surprised, but during the Nazi era, there were camps for women. Accordingly, women also worked there, from the SS. What were these terrible overseers like? As a rule, they were generally losers in life. They compensated for the lack of talents, intelligence, and appearance with a thirst for power over at least someone from the population of the planet, so they wouldn't feel as bad. And history has given them such an opportunity. Many of them even exchanged smiles during court hearings. Only 3 were not laughing, and among them is Johanna Bormann. Welcome to X-War History, the history of wars and crimes. Let's continue this episode. Childhood and youth. The future overseer, Johanna or Hanna Dorothea Emilia Bormann, was born in East Prussia. It happened in the absolutely peaceful year of 1893, in early September. She was born in the rural community of Bergen-Belsen. It was here that her father was engaged in farming. The Lord didn't endow the girl with an attractive appearance or even height. The girl grew to a size that was close to the size of dwarves. If you didn't know, she would become Weasel or Woman with Dogs many years later. One of the several female incarnations of Satan himself, since there is no other way to put it. Most likely it was because of this that the representative of the fair sex developed a dislike for tall and beautiful ladies. We do not know how she took out her hatred before she tied herself with blood to the ideas of the NSDAP. Perhaps she only accumulated resentment until adulthood, that is before the Nazi regime, and then she splashed everything out on women. Her German acquaintances later claimed that, at least at the age of 20, she definitely didn't have a fiancé. We know nothing more about the youthful years of a very ugly lady. And to be frank, we don't need to. In the hayloft with the boys. It is only reliably indicated that she, being far from school age, began to communicate with young guys from the Hitler Youth, to whom she was ready to provide especially close services in the hayloft, for free. Blonde male beasts came here to the agrarian area during campaigns. Yes, exactly. Like all women, Johanna really wanted carnal pleasures. Keep in mind that the Aryan propaganda called on true Nordics to do intimate things in any free time, in every possible way to saturate everything around racially with Nordics, starting of course with the space of Germany itself and then moving on to the entirety of the Third Reich, which was expanding. During all this time she saw nothing, no beauty of the world around her, except for the countryside inside the above-mentioned East Prussia. She devoted most of her life to a modest family farm, where she and the rest of the household vegetated in miserable poverty. So she lived with her parents until a very respectable age, helping them with the housework from morning till night. And only closer to her 40th birthday did she come to the city and get a job as a nurse in a madhouse, working for a measly 15 to 20 marks a month. Hanna had only one light at the end of the tunnel, attraction to the leader of one prominent party. And then came the period of the accession to the throne of the German Nazis and their leader Adolf Hitler. And although she was already 40, she realized that now she would just begin to experience life. The fact is that even before the Nazis came to power, Johanna was already secretly in love. She cherished the image of the leader of the future occupiers of Europe. She kept his face under the mattress of her bed. Now there is a reason to hang a photo on the wall, above the bed. Only her body was with the boys from Hitlerjugend, but her heart was with the former corporal of the Austrian army, who has now become the Führer of the Reich. Platonic love for the leader of Germany was traced even among married German women. Here, for example, is what the wife of the Minister of Propaganda Goebbels stated in her inner circle. Of course I love my husband, but my feelings for Hitler are stronger. I'm ready to give my life for him. I'm in the power of the Führer to such an extent that I have only one desire, to be closer to this man. Johanna Bormann turns 45. Overwhelmed with hormones, young Hitlerites, lying naked with the main character in the video under the moon, even before the significant year of 1933, told her that Aryan times were coming. They said that the world will be ruled by pure-blooded Aryans, primarily the Germans. Therefore worthless in literally all respects, and now an aging German lady was just waiting for the moment to somehow connect her life with the business of her idol. She arrived in Königsberg as soon as she learned about the appearance of the first death factories, because Hitler's empire was ready to go beyond the borders of Germany, Austria, and the Czech Sudetenland, unleashing the Second World War. The country got the opportunity to cleanse the whole of Europe from Jews, Roma people, communists, and other undesirables. In the context of historical events related to the beginning of mass repressions during World War II, multinational Königsberg became the second place after Berlin to demonstrate the horrors of the regime. Local barons wanted to see non-Aryans around them only as slaves. It is curious that the last Nazis were finished off here, in local castles. Geopolitically, the Nazi Empire sought to expand its borders, and East Prussia, being at the intersection of the interests of Eastern and Western Europe, became an important point in the entire process. Königsberg itself is a university city, previously being open to everyone. There were enough people like Hannah, volunteer girls. This can be explained logically. The working conditions are kind of good, no danger to health, dirt, or heavy loads, plus a decent salary, 105 marks per month. Recruiters promised bonuses for their work. Also, do not forget about the free service uniform and even underwear. Finally, the most important thing is the very power over people, the very significance that Johanna Bormann really desired. Lichtenburg. She ended up in a prisoner housing area in the Saxony-Anhalt region. At first, she was taken to work in Lichtenburg. Its first function, after verification of identity, personnel arrangement, and brief professional training, was punishments of prisoners. Lichtenburg, along with Dachau, were the two oldest places of repression. They were arranged in the year the Nazis came to power, hence the oldest, most experienced trainers. For Fräulein Bormann, the place was a point of practice. The 45-year-old Aryan had to be shown what she had learned in several briefings. She saw socialists, communists, Jehovah's Witnesses, Muslims, incorrigible criminals, homosexuals, lesbians, opponents of the Nazi regime from Austria and the Czech Republic, and so on. It was explained to her there that people in any of these categories are not true Aryans. There were no Jews and Gypsies here, who began to be disposed of a little later. In terms of the places described below, this place was not for death, but for re-education. It was here that Hannah learned to wield a stick, forcing her victims to effectively walk in single line and circles. The newcomer showed herself to be a very hard-working guard, and after a while was assigned to Ravensbrück, to the punitive zone, where all the barracks were exclusively for women. Then the fresh workers saw Jews, Roma people, and everyone who had their type of appearance. Ravensbrück. The camp, located in the state of Brandenburg, is known for the fact that 130,000 people passed through it. Most of these people did not manage to survive. They beat cruelly here. Here her career rapidly went uphill. A psychologically and physically handicapped person acted even more furiously. That is, for any sidelong glance of a Jew or Roma woman, the entire barrack had to walk in single line, with hands behind their backs, to the moment of fainting. In addition, she was taught to work with service dogs, which were specially set on prisoners. The dogs already knew the smell of those who needed to be caught up with if suddenly something happens to guards. The Bitte Hitler follower learned a lot of new things from more experienced local mentors. They knew how to break the will of the victims, and in a very short time. Auschwitz. In Auschwitz, for example, some SS gargoyles broke the jaws of prisoners, and from the very first blow. We are now talking about Maria Mandl. In the designated location, the SS gendarme continued to perform her usual duties already under Maria Mandl's command. Then much more serious war crimes began. Johanna helped to implement all the projects of Frau Mandl. Together with her, she was looking for Jewish women with a musical education. They assembled them into an orchestra that played every time a stream of prisoners gathered to be transported to the gas chambers. A column of doomed women marched to Mandl's favorite works. She allowed Bormann and the other guards to, so to speak, break the fingers of everyone except the musicians. The performers of the music sat in blue skirts and jackets and white blouses, so they could not be confused with someone else. These women still retained their health in this way. After all, they still had to play at all sorts of other events, entertainment, and drunken gatherings. In Auschwitz, Bormann tried in every possible way to shorten the lives of captive girls. All of them had to be killed in the end anyway. For some work, new batches were already arriving, a fresh, still completely healthy mess for them. The guards of the Nazi order shortened the lives of local inhabitants by beatings, including with legs and sticks, described goose walks, setting hungry working shepherds on them. And for the latter type of atrocity, Bormann even received the nickname the woman with dogs. The dogs she let loose disfigured many imprisoned women. The petty dwarf chose those who were much more beautiful. A steely squat lady with a distorted perception of the world was happy to set dogs on a prisoner or in a whole group. Quite literally, she fed the girls to shepherds. Hannah met two local prisoners in Lichtenburg, criminals and infanticides, who managed to work as midwives. Later, she asked to release them from Lichtenburg, and she dragged them everywhere. She used this couple to save pregnant prisoners from the fetus, who were initially pregnant or raped right in one of the Auschwitz camps by the SS men. Quickly getting out of the mother's womb, drowning in a barrel, and strangling with a wire was quite a common thing for them. Johanna studied the materials of their criminal case. Bormann isn't only the author of orders to get rid of the new Untermensch, absolutely unnecessary to the empire. She also concocted an instruction to criminals not to hide the murdered newborns, but to show what they did to others. Possibly, this is what struck those present at the trial of the Nazis most of all. Hindenburg Camp. These torture chambers were located on the territory of the city of Auschwitz. Here, near the Polish village of Zabrze, Bormann honed her skills in selecting prisoners to perfection. Selection of the people she was entrusted with back in Ravensbrück. After being baited by dogs, this was a favorite part of her duties. From 400 to 500 women were kept in the camp. All of them had to work in inhuman conditions, and even according to an unbearable schedule. The meaning of the Lagersperre, camp selection, was that it was necessary to identify candidates for extermination. After the whistles and loud shouts of the SS ladies, the women of the barracks had to gather in rows on the huge parade ground. As you might have guessed, they identified the weak, suffering from exhaustion, diseases, the consequences of injuries, and harsh beatings. The demonic creativity of the guards consisted in the fact that they could write down as unfit any of those whom they did not like in some way. Women and girls had to have a pitiful look down. To look dignified is to sign your own sentence. Hannah could arrange for each barrack separately, throw one of the unfortunates off the couch. If the poor person got up for a long time, then that's it. That's her end. Now she's the first of those who will form a column going to the gas chamber, and her corpse is neutralized by burning in a furnace. This scheme has become perfected in the camps. Bergen-Belsen. The Bergen-Belsen concentration camp is one of the 5 most terrible camps in the entire existence of the Third Reich. Originally established in the year 1940 as a camp for prisoners of war, French, Belgian, British POWs, the camp became a place for about 600 prisoners. Later, Roma and political prisoners were also brought here. And after the attack on the Soviet Union in 1941, about 20,000 Soviet prisoners of war were brought to Bergen-Belsen, of which a little more than 2,000 people survived just a year later. In 1943, a special zone was equipped on the territory of the camp, in which only wealthy prisoners of Jewish nationality were kept. The German leadership assumed that this would be a so-called exchange fund, in order to return from Allied captivity their own officers who ended up in the hands of the British, French, or Americans. It was also assumed that the captured officers and soldiers of the countries of the anti-Hitler coalition held in the camp would also be exchanged, though in practice there were only a few real cases of this very exchange. The structure of the camp was quite simple. There were 8 isolated zones. Each of them contained a different category of prisoners. With the beginning of 1944, Bergen-Belsen received the status of a so-called reconstruction camp, where prisoners were sent who were no longer able to perform any work, sick, crippled, weakened, and dying. Naturally, as we know the Nazis of the time, the status of a restorative one implied the fastest possible disposal of prisoners who were no longer valuable as a workforce. Prisoners were constantly beaten for a reason and for no reason. Dogs were regularly set on them. The surviving prisoners commonly said that hell was heaven compared to the Bergen-Belsen camp. As one of the survivors of the so-called Jewish zone once wrote, "It was unbearably hot there, probably from a huge crowd of people. Soon it began to rain. Water seeped in us through the holes. My sister and I huddled together under our thin blankets." From the beginning of the liberation of Europe, prisoners from other camps, such as Auschwitz, Majdanek, etc., began to be transported to Bergen-Belsen. From December 1944 to March 1945, at least 45,000 prisoners arrived at this camp. From the terrible crowding, inhumane conditions of detention, and constant humiliation which was officially documented later, several thousand people died in the camp every single day. Therefore, the territory was very quickly filled with corpses, which simply could not be quickly buried. Overcrowding of the camp with prisoners, lack of food, and extreme exhaustion led to a natural end of almost everyone. In the spring, a typhus epidemic broke out in the camp. People were dying every hour, and a little later, every second. The number of dead bodies was growing at such an incomprehensible rate that the commandant ordered living prisoners to dig graves and bury the dead, no matter what. However, this measure did not bring success either. Half-dead prisoners physically could not dig holes at the required speed. But this problem worried the camp commandant least of all. On his orders, when escorting prisoners to the place of digging graves, 2 orchestra bands constantly and without interruption played during the burial of prisoners. The work lasted from sunset to sunset, so the music played all daylight hours. The cynicism was that everyone had to dance to classical compositions under the threat of death. Bodies were dragged into the graves, workers fell there, and to the same music, for entertainment, the guards shot the weakest prisoners or poisoned them with dogs. The condition of the prisoners can be judged from the memoirs of the soldiers who entered the camp in April 1945. The soldiers and officers who entered the camp saw a terrible picture, more reminiscent of scenes from the dungeons of hell. Johanna was transferred to this camp in January 1945, after a period of repeated work in the same Ravensbrück. Bormann was transferred to Bergen-Belsen with a promotion, becoming a mentor supervisor. Johanna habitually pushed the prisoners out of bed, looking for the exhausted ones. With a shout of "damned simulant," she dragged such a prisoner out of the barracks and separated those who were then led to the gas chamber. Although there was no music playing near the barracks here, this is no longer Auschwitz, and the cruel creature also taught junior guards to do the same. Her teaching served them only a few months. After all, the capitulation of Nazi Germany was not far off. Bormann's students then betrayed her, already while at the trial. They had seen too many things that made them shiver. Remember what Bormann ordered to do with pregnant women and then with the fetuses? Without a doubt, the devilish corruption of soul of Johanna Bormann. But she sent some of the pregnant women from Bergen-Belsen to even more terrible fanatics, the doctors of the camp medical laboratories. After all, they needed babies who had already been born. Experiments were carried out with stitching, testing all kinds of vaccines, blood transfusions for wounded soldiers of the Reich. Psychiatrists who studied people who succumbed to Goebbels and Rosenberg's propaganda discovered a profound transformation inside their psyche, which allowed them to step over everything that ideologists from all religions and teachings talked about. Moreover, Goebbels and Rosenberg explained to the crowd that the heritage of those unnecessary people should be burned. Ladies who served in the SS fed on the new science of life. And yet people, even if they have been brainwashed, are the masters of fate themselves. They must be held accountable for their own actions. Johanna Bormann also had to answer for her heinous crimes, although this mouse has already managed to prepare a bunch of justifications for her activities as a warden. However, people found out about this after her arrest. Bergen-Belsen continued to operate normally even when the British forces were almost close to the concentration camp. Only the panic of the guards after bypassing the perimeter let the employees of one of the death factories know that it was too late to run away somewhere. Some of the personnel changed into civilian clothes. In the camouflage of ordinary Wehrmacht soldiers, they were threatened only with captivity, and many of them, for greater persuasiveness, dressed in striped robes taken from already dead prisoners. This disguise did not help the executioners, since the surviving part of the prisoners knew absolutely each and everyone by sight. The British who broke the gates of the camp and some of the prisoners did not allow any one of the criminals to escape. Accordingly, the 52-year-old, especially limping Fräulein Bormann, did not manage to retreat. Her physiognomy, for all the above reasons, was remembered by the surviving prisoners perfectly. Everyone who somehow crossed paths with her probably saw her later in nightmares for many and many more years. The British found 10,000 corpses and 60,000 living dead here. Not everyone was able to speak, but those who could, after eating, drinking, putting themselves in order, told and showed a lot. They told how 3 women, who will be discussed for the last time later, used intimidation and violence as a means of control, creating an atmosphere of intense fear and even real depression. Trial and execution. Bormann got to the Belsen trials. As you know, it took place right in the concentration camp of the same name, where the Nazis themselves were forced to bury the corpses of prisoners. Johanna found herself in a makeshift courtroom set up in one of the camp's spacious rooms, in the company of the younger Irma Grese and Elisabeth Volkenrath. Those two also had blood on their hands up to their elbows. One did the devil knows what with the prisoners, and the second decided who would go to the gas chambers, also sometimes allowing herself violence. All 3 Nazis tried to somehow justify their atrocities in the eyes of the judge, presented their actions in public as more harmless. In particular, Bormann referred to the fact that she saved many girls by placing them in a team of musicians. Allegedly, it was not she who was so evil, it was life itself that turned out to be unfair to the poor things in striped robes. And what about her? In this hopeless and horrific financial situation, she just wanted to get a decent income. The same thing was said by the whitened Volkenrath and the still young Grese. However, there were too many witnesses who claimed the exact opposite. Among those who testified against them, there were even colleagues. After all, in exchange for such cooperation, the military tribunal promised them shorter terms of imprisonment. Yes, those who did not commit murders, including somehow indirectly, were waiting for only prison in the town of Hamelin. In principle, Bormann, Volkenrath, and Grese were brought to the same place after the trial. But not in the cells, it is way too mild, but on the gallows conveyor, the one in which the sentences were carried out by an Englishman, Dr. Albert Pierpoint. Hannah, climbing the scaffold, tried to limp as clearly as possible. What if she, a worthless cripple, would be spared in the end? The above-mentioned trio of fanatics was, despite all their words and pretentious behaviors, hanged here. Ironically, the necks of these Nazi women were much weaker than their racial hatred to others. You were watching Explore History. If you want to watch other episodes we have on the channel, you can click on the screen, subscribe and leave a like. Help us grow and produce more educational content. See you later.